Cat Matson. This is always a pleasure to hang out, spend time, pick your brain, share energy. You're always doing amazing things. It's lovely to have a conversation about podcasting, something that I feel very, very passionate about. Just about 98 episodes, about to be 100 episodes. Congratulations. How do you feel about the whole journey, how you started and what made you start?
Okay. So thank you for having me back, Ronsley. It is always lovely to have a chat with you. It's bizarre that I'm about to record episode 100, and it really snuck up on me. And in fact, I still thought that I had a few more weeks. And then I realized by the time I did my back scheduling on production and all of that, so I don't feel like I am giving it the due milestone credit that it should have. I've pulled together a couple of guests and said, okay, let's do it. So how does that feel? It feels weird, to be perfectly honest. Actually, it's not dissimilar to raising kids. My eldest just turned 18, and that also feels weird. It's like, how did that happen? I don't remember actually doing anything to make that happen. It just did.
Yeah. And I'd love to know the conversations that you were having, and especially with yourself when you started. How long were you thinking about it before you decided to record?
You know me, Ronsley, I love a microphone. I prefer a stage though. I started this podcast 3 years ago now. It was back in 2020 when I started Impactful Presenters. And I started it because I'm teaching people how to speak. So it makes sense that I have a podcast. And I think in the beginning, I decided that even though I prefer video, or I actually prefer live stages, to be perfectly frank, what I did like about podcasting was I didn't have to look amazing. I could literally just start recording. And for me, that is very easy. I can have an idea. 15 minutes later, I've got an episode in the can. Hey, presto. So that's exactly what I did for the first however many episodes, 20, 30. Then I realized that I was missing out on a whole lot of opportunities by not recording the video as well. And given that my podcast is about reaching more people and increasing trust factor, I went to video. And so now I have to batch record now because I need to turn myself on. I need to actually show up and be ready. So some of the fun's kind of come out of it, I must admit. Now there's a bit more thought into it. And that's part of the journey, actually. Do I keep doing this? This isn't as fun. But yes, it is fun when I do it. And then I get feedback from episodes that I didn't expect to get feedback on and go, okay, that's great.
Yeah. Bon Appetit, which got me famous, still gets like tens of thousands of downloads, but I haven't released anything since 2019. I just don't got to a point where it's like I'm done saying what I have to about this particular topic. And you kind of move on, and it's really fascinating because the TEDx talk I did at UQ got made a TED talk, and I've got asked a few times to speak again. And I don't have anything yet to say that I want to put a TEDx thing behind. And I know a lot of your work is around using your voice and speaking up. And that's basically what I've been doing for the last 11
Mm.
years. So let's talk about when is the right time to use it, because now anyone can have an opinion, but then there's also people who have genuinely educated opinions that are holding back. And how do you deal with that dichotomy?
Somebody asked in a group that I'm a member of the other day, I'm thinking of starting a podcast. What should I think about? But I said, stop. Not because starting a podcast is a bad idea, of course. It's actually a lot of hard work, and you want to be really clear on where you're taking it. If you just want to have a chat, then do that in your Facebook community or whatnot. But if you're actually wanting to do this to build an audience, if you're wanting to do this to build authority, then you don't need to have it all perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but you do need to have a few episodes in the can. You need to have a few topics under your belt. You need to know why you're doing this, where you stand in your industry and in your landscape, and what you want people to do as a result of listening. It's funny because I've been podcasting for years. I should have checked before we came on, but I can't remember when I started doing the social media for small business podcast with Susie Daphnis. We've stopped longer now than we did it. But as you said with Bon Appetit, I still get people saying, oh, that was a great episode. I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like the
I,
Facebook algorithm has changed a billion times since we
yeah.
recorded. How can that still be valuable? But we were
Yeah.
talking about strategy.
Yeah. And I totally forgot about that as well. So you've been podcasting for a while, and this is which iteration? Is this your second iteration or third iteration?
I think this is second, unless I've forgotten. So the social media for small business podcast that I did with Susie Daphnis from her business was the start. And that was a very structured podcast. You know, that was a half-hour episode. We would go scouting for guests every time. I'm very grateful for the Her Business team who did a lot of that heavy lifting. And in fact, when I started speaking with confidence, one of the key things for me was I was still running the business as a side business. I had a full-time job. There was no chance in hell that I was going to be scouting for guests, scheduling diaries, doing diary Tetris, coming up with questions. It had to be quick, it had to be easy, it had to be a monologue. Now that I've got more capacity because I'm in the business full time now, there is the opportunity to reach out to guests, but that's actually presenting itself with a whole new conundrum. My listeners are used to the monologues, they're used to the short 10-minute practical how to tips. And so now bringing on guests gets me hot and bothered because I love talking to people. How do I make it valuable to my listeners who want the tips, who want the practical, how do I speak better, Cat?
Yeah, so I'm still, 1,500 episodes in or 1,500 interviews in, and I could never imagine doing anything else until the recent podcast, My AI Love Affair, which, wow, like there was so much inside me that had to come out. And I never really understood what that meant until this particular podcast. Like I never understood that until this one. Enough about me. Let's talk about you. And so impactfulpresenters.com is where we go to find all the cool stuff you're up to. When you were thinking about doing the podcast, you mentioned this journey. Right now, what is your process before you hit record and then what happens afterwards?
Okay. I record 4 at a time. So we do bulk recording, bulk editing, and bulk social. So I come up with 4 topics. Those 4 topics will have come from my Speaking with Confidence Facebook group. They will have come out of conversations, out of the group coaching conversations in the Impactful Presenters program. So it's relatively easy for me to come up with the topics, I guess. I've got a Trello board with all of the ideas and I just pull them over and I map it out. Each episode, the monologue episodes, have a hook, have the content and I do my best to make the content really practical. So people walk away knowing how to do something better than they did when they started listening. I then have a story or an illustration point to demonstrate what I've just taught. Then I have a recap. Then I have a call to action. I then jump on and I record. I record all of those episodes as quickly as possible. Even though each episode is a 10 to 12-minute episode, I always tell myself that I can get more episodes done in an hour. And then I go, no, but Kat, 12 times 4 is.
It never works out. I mean, this is my first time doing monologues, and it's a totally different art by itself. Like being a journalistic interviewer, your only
Mhm.
job is to get someone's story. That is a learning curve, and even doing this is a learning curve, and also draining curve because you finish recording, you're like, oh, I don't know whether I can record anymore.
And I think that's a really good point, Ronsley. I love speaking, and the knowledge that I have in this regard it does feel like it's infinite. But I do get to the end of a recording session and go, and that's it, I'm done. I've tried using some AI to help me with that. It's not working enough for me. And I'm finding that it's actually just easier for me to type something out while the
Yeah.
episode's still fresh. Part of that is because I'm big on authenticity. And in fact, that's part of my spiel. You know, I teach people to speak with authority,
Yep.
confidence, authenticity, and with
Yep.
impact. And as soon as the AI stuff comes back and it's just words, I'm like, yeah, it's completely lost the cat tone.
Well, I
So it
think
is,
that there's an element of giving it guardrails. And
yes.
one of the things that I would recommend you do is find a piece of transcript that's maybe 5 to 7 minutes long. Take that transcript, put it into ChatGPT and say, analyze this for my voice and writing style.
Yeah,
And
right.
then when you're writing your show notes, say, this is my writing style, write my show notes in my style.
And ChatGPT can do that.
It'll do way all that and more. I'm only
Okay.
like giving you sort of quick fix solution now
I
with
like
custom
that.
instructions, with plugins, with code interpreter. You can do some phenomenal things, and it's getting to a point where we've got to realize that yeah, we can wash our clothes with our hands and we'll do a thorough job, but there's a washing machine that you can press a button and get it done and get it even dried in the same cycle these days.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And I must admit, that is one of the conversations that I have with myself. Some forms of copy and some form of content are more valuable than others, right? My show notes, they should be written for SEO purposes, not for voice purposes. And so
Yeah.
chat or AI is
And,
perfect for that. Whereas my
and
newsletter, that's
yeah.
worth putting a bit more of my voice in.
Well, and also when you think about how you're creating the content, you're using the authentic creation and then you're distributing for different platforms depending on the value that each platform. And you're not a social media expert, you're not a SEO expert. Like it's hard to be everything at the same time, but you're taking your authentic creation, applying these rules for the different platforms and just
Mm,
repurposing it. As a podcaster, I've helped easily 1,200 businesses and brands now start a podcast and grow a podcast. And when I came to doing this one, I still had the same problems like everyone else. I was going to call it AI Geeks.
oh, I'm
And
glad you didn't.
yeah, I'm so glad I did. And I as
Yeah.
well. And funny enough, I was in a mastermind group with ex We Are podcast attendees, and they're like, "Hey, Leanne Hughes, like, come to this mastermind." And I was like, my question was, okay, I got this new thing. I've recorded 7 episodes. Everything is done. It's about to be published. It's going to be called AI Geeks. What are your thoughts first on everything? Then this Julian's writing stuff down. Then everyone stops talking, and Julian says, I think it should be called My AI Love Affair: How I Stopped Being Married to Working Long Hours. And there was like dead silence in the room. I was like, wow. I wrote it down. I tried to tweak it, and it turned out to be the best thing ever. It like
Thank you,
literally,
Julian.
yeah, thank you, Julian. So the whole thing changed. And
Yeah.
it changed primarily because of what they saw that I didn't see. They were
Yep.
like, when you talk about AI, I've never seen anyone talk about AI. I want to start implementing it right now. And none of this AI geek makes sense to me. People
Hmm.
just need to see what you see. When you talk with people to get confidence, what are the things that you apply? What kind of trainings do you put in place for someone to build confidence to speak? Because we know that speaking apparently is one of the like most feared things or something. Like public
People,
speaking is,
yeah, it's listed as the second biggest fear after death, public speaking. And there's a whole lot of stuff that goes into it. And I didn't actually realize how complex it was until I started working in this space. First of all, when it comes to speaking, where there's that sense that all eyes on, they get nervous, and all of their stuff about being wrong, about being rejected, about being seen as stupid, as being seen as not as smart as they think they are, or not as smart as the other people in the room, all of that stuff comes up. And the minute all of that stuff comes up, what happens? Well, we go into fight or flight. And then in our mind, as we hear ourselves rambling, we hear ourselves talking in circles, and that just makes it worse because our brain's actually yelling at us now, going, now you really do sound stupid. When we have an experience like that, and then we tell ourselves, I can't speak articulately or confidently or with authority, we then start to say to ourselves, so maybe I don't know what I tell myself I know. Maybe I'm not the expert that I've been made out to be. You know, and I've been in the personal development industry for so long, it's ridiculous. And we've always known in that space that what we tell ourselves is really important. Give yourself positive affirmations and all that kind of stuff. But in a professional context, it's actually not just what you tell yourself, it's your ability to articulate the value you bring to a conversation. And most of us now are service professionals. We can't point to a something that we've made. This is where I was. Our work is invisible. We knew it at the time, but it doesn't exist in a tangible artifact kind of a way. So, one of the biggest things I work on with people is how do you capture your past? How do you capture your stories? How do you capture your experience and articulate it in a way that demonstrates your authority that you can then just pull out anytime? So, then next time you're in that meeting where you're asked to share something, you're not just saying, this is what we should do because this is what the theory says. You can say, this is what we need to do because this is best practice. And that then
mm,
builds an upward spiral of confidence. Of course, there's a whole lot of other techniques then around how do you just hijack your brain when it's in fight or flight, you know, breathing, calming down our voice, asking for a moment. That's a really good question. Let me just think about that before I answer, like just slowing it all down. So, yeah, the more I've done this work, the more I realize that our ability to express ourselves externally is a key to our internal confidence, as
yep,
well as what I thought I was teaching when I first started this, which was just how do you speak confidently?
yep. I think also the amount of reps in your expression of yourself when you're trying to get this internal dialogue out, the amount of reps that you take to get there will change. Every 10 reps, I'm different in the way I'm expressing myself because I've got new feedback loops that are in play. And I feel like we're trying to keep up with someone's episode, whatever, 100 versus episode one. I
Correct.
was wondering whether how much, like, for speaking with confidence, like a podcast would obviously be massive reps, right, in place for someone that wants to speak with confidence.
When people say, "Should I have a podcast?" and or actually what I get most of the time is, "I need to work with you, Kat, because I'm not doing the things that I know I need to do for my business because I'm scared of speaking." And yes, you're spot on, Ronsley. The reps count. So you rock up and do the best you can today, and then you do a little bit better tomorrow, and then a little bit better the next day. And you build on the momentum and you build on the wins rather than beat yourself up for the things that you missed. And we're all human, right? And if the second biggest fear for the human population is public speaking, then by definition, 99% of the population are experiencing the same worry as you are when it comes to speaking. So just be human.
Yeah, and also it's probably the judgment that is more scary than the act of speaking, and the fear that you're opening yourself up to being judged because you're on a stage and you're orating, I suppose.
Well, that was a conversation that I had 2 or 3 episodes now with Kate Toon on my podcast.
Hmm.
And, the reason I had her on was because she said, "I'd like to talk about the confidence to be disliked." You have to be willing to be disliked in order to find the people who like you, because by definition, you cannot be liked by everyone. But if you're hiding away because you're scared of the people that aren't going to like you, then you're also missing out on the people who are going to like you.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned authenticity through this whole speaking with confidence. And for the last few years now, I'd say at least 3 or 4 years, when someone starts a podcast with us, the first step is actually uncovering their truth so that they can speak their truth, followed by who's the audience that would care about that truth, and so on. When you talk about authenticity, how do you define it? How do you prefer we see that?
Mm. It's probably a couple of ways. First way is being yourself, as in not needing to step into the persona that you're telling yourself you need to step into to claim a stage. So the first thing is to just be willing to show up fully as you. The second thing, and this comes back to your messaging piece that you just mentioned, is you own who you are, what you do, and why you do it, and the stories that have led you to this point in your life. You don't need to tell all of those stories, but knowing that they're sitting there in your brag bag of examples help you go, "Oh, yeah, it does make sense that I'm doing this." People often discount that. People
Mm,
want to connect with other people. And that's where the authenticity lies for me, to sum all of that up. People can't connect with you if they feel like they're only getting the surface or the persona. They want to get to your heart.
yeah. The social media version of you with all the happy highlights, and everyone sees that and thinks that that is your life, when we don't share all the other stuff that actually happens around our lives that are kind of embarrassing a little bit and devastating some of the times as well. When you're thinking about these people, sort of, because institutionally we are taught not to raise our voices, is there a way that we can sort of start to think about that?
So I have had a 11 billion careers in the space of 30 odd years. And what that has done for me is it's exposed me to a lot of different industries and a lot of different styles of conversations. In the 8 or 9 years that I spent in the public service, in working in local councils, first as Brisbane's chief digital officer, then out at Ipswich leading the economic and community development teams, what became very clear to me was the problems that the world is facing right now need different thinking and different voices in the conversations in order to solve them. You need to have been educated in a certain way. You need to be able to craft your argument in a certain way. There's a whole lot of unconscious bias in there, as well as effective communication. So I say all of that as some context to your question around the social media landscape has had us believe that all we have to do is speak and speak loud enough and we will be heard. That's not true. All we've got are micro echo chambers, all yelling and screeching with moral outrage and righteous indignation at each other within their circles of people who agree with them. Yeah. And not much is changing. So, what needs to change is that different people need to be able to be effective in the old school conversations. You can't drive change by throwing rocks at the decision makers, by throwing rocks at the institutions. You actually need to be on the inside. So, to answer your question about how important is it that we raise our voices, I would actually say it's not about raising our voices, it's about threading our voices so they're heard by the right people at the right time. And sometimes that can take years. Like I learnt the hard way. If you want to drive policy change, you say the same thing in different ways over and over and over and over and over again. And then eventually people go, oh, and in fact, I used to love it when political leaders that I was working indirectly for would start using some of my phrases. The purpose of influence is to have them believe it was their idea.
Yeah, and that's such a huge point. And what you're saying is so important for where we're going, especially because I genuinely believe that artificial intelligence is going to easily be the biggest conversation of our lifetime. I feel things are going to change so dramatically and drastically, which are already are. We have to rediscover everything, how it's being done, why it's being done, what's the manner it's being done in. And we right now have a huge responsibility more than ever because we can think of AI like a silicon based intelligent form while we are a carbon based
Mhm.
intelligent form. And it's already getting smarter than us. It's in a lot of ways. And we are right now like the parents training the child. And we can either be the parents that say, do as I'm telling you to do, or we can be the parents that say, do as I do. But these old generations or these old civilizations had some deep wisdom, especially with ancestry and bloodline, that is so important and so relevant to keep being authentic and continuing to thread those voices, as you
Yeah.
say.
And in the context of being the parents of these AI machines that we're now raising, using that same analogy, we also have to be very cognizant that there's a world that these AI children need to explore far greater than any world we can impart on them. And so we have to actually encourage them to go and explore the world and go get the other information because right now the AI beasts are informed largely by a white, wealthy, upper class internet. We've got to understand it's currently searching only what's on the internet. And so we have to be mindful of the conversations that we're not only feeding into, but we're then receiving back out of, because that's literally just going to create a smaller and smaller loop of information. Talk about echo chambers. We will literally implode on ourselves in a smaller collection of thought and knowledge.
Okay, so for people starting a podcast right now, just getting into their journey as a podcaster, what kind of advice would you have for them? What kind of returns have you seen? I mean, return on investment, return on scale, return on content, return on relationships. What kind of things have you seen around creating the podcast? Yeah, like some advice for someone just starting.
Okay. So I'll answer the returns question first. The returns are nebulous. And if you're looking for a straight return on investment, go do Facebook ads because it's not that tangible. For me, the returns have been credibility, have been authority, have been reputation. I do get people say to me, oh my goodness, Kat, I feel so lucky to meet you. I'm like, what? And it's because they've been listening to the podcast. But there is an inferred
It's
something there that people assume that you're bigger, better, and brighter than you perhaps feel yourself.
Well, I think they feel comfortable. It's like how people get sad when Michael Jackson died. Like
Yeah,
we didn't know who Michael Jackson was
yeah.
really.
That's a good
Um,
analogy. Yeah. So the returns for me have been loose but fun. My advice to people, do it. Have at least 8 episodes lined up mentally in your mind. What are you going to talk about? And have those first 4 recorded and scheduled. You need rhythm and you need regularity. I at first started just doing it when I wanted to and no momentum whatsoever. People like rhythm. So now my episodes drop every Tuesday morning without fail, and all the content that goes around it. And from the context of, do I start even though I'm not a good speaker? Yes, you start. You don't read a script. You still be authentic. You still be conversational. You still be you, and you will get better. You will get better. But people will connect to more authentic voices. I completely and utterly disagree with any notion that the market is saturated and there's already enough out there. You'll always find a way to connect with your people if you're delivering good content, and you will find out what your content is by doing it as well. You don't learn to ride a bike by thinking about riding a bike. You learn to ride a bike by riding and falling off. And then one day you're not falling off anymore.
Yeah.
And podcasting and speaking is exactly the same.
I have a dear friend of mine. His name is Philip McKernan. He has a great saying. He's like, everyone wants to make this impact on the planet and they want to look good while they're making this impact.
If you're making an impact, there's going to be bruises.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, impactfulpresenters.com is where you go to find all the cool stuff Cat's up to and check out our podcast. Cat, as always, this has been a little slice of heaven. Thank you.
Thanks, Ronsley.